sum it up, it's moving beyond the coincidences of designated areas and the focus on designation, and really getting to the on the ground, what does combining local and combining natural and cultural heritage values at the local level. Basically, can we move beyond designation and do things at that local value? Does that capture? Yeah. Okay, great. Michael.
Couldn't agree more. So that's an easy one for me. I think that all that the designations have achieved, and they've achieved a lot, so I don't mean in a disparaging way, is to show what's possible. You know, there's potential. If we actually protect things, and if we manage that properly, and if we work with people, we can improve the quality of biodiversity and we can improve the quality of life. The same with monument sites. But I think certainly within protected area management and the framework of that, there's been a realization for at least a couple of decades that they're not islands. You know, I go back to the ecological principles I was talking about. You know, the connections, they don't sit there in isolation. And this is why it needs to be looked at, from our perspective anyway, as a whole of landscape approach. You cannot just look after the protected areas and let the rest go to hell, basically. Let's face it, that was part of the problem, maybe not the intention, but that was part of the problem. So I think that the potential, the protected areas have shown what is possible. And scientifically, and I think it was only within the last 18 months or so, the UN had brought out a report that has definitively shown that there's a 15 to 20% increase in biodiversity within scientifically monitored protected areas. And if that can be achieved within those areas now, and getting that message across, if you like, to use Kieran's analogy of doing that from the cultural perspective and getting a political focus on it, protected areas work. Now we need to make it work in a much broader landscape setting.
Good. Okay, another response?
Yeah. First of all, the fact that we have started with highlighting the spatial interlinkages, overlaps between Natura areas and World Heritage sites was done for a very simple reason, that the UNESCO sites are the most easily accessible in terms of spatial data availability. Then, as explained, we tried also to expand to other areas where some culture with important European and recognized cultural values, those under the Nostra awards, and we would like to expand also to nationally designated areas or other spatial data with, for example, what I just heard from Margaret about the Irish registry of 32,000, right?
132.
Yeah, 132,000 monuments being somehow registered on is important information that we could also use to showcase indeed how these overlaps can be really much more widespread than the jewels, in a way, those World Heritage sites. But the importance of this work is not really to show, okay, we have a spatial overlap, so what? The importance then comes to the next step. So what can you do while you recognize this coincidence of joint values, and how then questions how those relate to, for example, when it comes to agricultural areas, talking about landscape management in a way, agricultural practices, the financing opportunities which were just very interestingly mentioned through either Pillar 1 or Pillar 2 of the CAP, for example. So how those then synergies can really be achieved on the ground with, so to show the opportunities for those aspects. Of course, I should repeat this time and again, our entry point is still the good management of protected areas in terms of preservation status, improving, achieving fair preservation status, and all that. But this is the ultimate purpose, to go to the ground and offer possibly some tools, I would say, to, for example, to site managers, how you can do it in a practical way. But of course, learn also from what happens, what we're doing right now.
Great. Any other responses from panel?
Yeah. Just I think the work that the Burn Life Project did, what they monitored, they actually monitored the outcomes, and they monitored the farm income. They monitored the animal husbandry. They monitored the landscape. Just when they monitored the factors, so to make sure that the scheme was a win-win for everybody, because if it's not if it's not a win for the farmer or for the owner, then you don't get buy-in. Now I suppose on the cultural heritage side, we're quite lucky because the public in Ireland are very positively disposed generally towards heritage structures. I think it might be a little bit different on the natural side, a little bit more maybe I don't know, that maybe it's just embedded in our culture and in our history, our knowledge, our superstitions, our awareness of these sites because of our traditions basically and our folklore.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Anybody want to respond to that first? A broader view of culture than just monuments in a landscape. They're a starting point, but they're not. Culture is constructed.
Well, in college we had our professor's now dead, but his definition of culture was learned behaviour. That was his definition. So, for me that's always been the way it is. And it is broader. It's how we live, it's how we move, it's how we identify, it's what we feel, of course.
Just very briefly, I mean, if you take modern and contemporary approaches to landscape management, they include in that the whole process of, if you like, rural towns and villages. For many years, you'd have landscape management proposals that actually drew lines and excluded towns and villages from that, and that is wrong, because an expression of our culture is our rural towns and villages, just to focus on that for now. And even the example that Photius had of the kestrels, it was where were they living? They're in there. So that connection between culture and nature has to include where people live, right? Not only where the kestrels live, because we shape that and we value that. So I think that you're entirely correct, but it is a slow and has been an evolving process, because I mean I've on a personal level and professional level been involved in discussions around this for longer than I would care to remember. And I landed myself in real trouble one time with my contemporaries and my colleagues, because I penned an article which was entitled "We Need to De-Expertise Protected Areas." You can find it, it's on the IUCN website still, it gets the odd hit. The point that I was making, my colleagues took it that there is no place for experts in protected area management, but no, I was saying no, they are the informers of decision through knowledge, not the people who actually ultimately need to make the decision or should be making the decision. And until there is a sort of a psychological shift there from all of us, whether we're archaeologists, whether we're ecologists, whether we're administrators, that you can't impose on people. And that's why, in terms of talking about, say, that new form of legislation, I'm not talking about the established forms of legislation where you designate and you put lines on maps. There is well-known forms of legislation in many European countries which enable people to come together to do things. And that's the sort of thing that we need. My belief, and certainly the Heritage Council's publications on believe is required to join up all the thinking and make people cooperate, and give communities the opportunity to enable themselves to do what they want within the areas where they live and work. So that's where you really make the connection between culture and nature, in my view.
Any other responses from Paul about that broader view of culture? Yep. Happy with that? Okay, I'll take one more question before tea.
This is mostly for Kieran. I suppose picking up on what you said about the cultural heritage sector being really good at promoting what they do and raising awareness. And I was just wondering, there was a biodiversity launch, for the action plan. Why there wasn't kind of similar, maybe media coverage of the National Peatland Strategy or the recently launched SAC Management Plan, because they're just so full of really good information for the public about peatlands and their values. So just wondering why that was.
I wasn't directly involved, but I suspect it's just that thing that sometimes we're so focused on getting the project out the door that we don't work hard enough and we're not seeing the opportunity. And so I think we just have to improve a lot. There's very often this thing of just we get our work done, but not tell people. And I don't know whether that's particularly strong in the natural environment, but I suspect it is, because inevitably when you have conversations like this and you start to list all the stuff that's going on, and then other people say, well, how come I never heard of it?
Yeah.
And particularly the successful projects.
I noticed as well a theme that came through both Fodios' talk and Kieran's talk was that you both picked out this idea of engagement as an area that needs more work. Do you want to comment on that, Fodios?
I think this is also a very interesting concept to explore a bit more, talking about links between culture and natural assets and heritage. I mean, this feeling of, which very much related to the need for engagement with people, with the broader public, with landowners, with administrators, etc., etc. I mean, this feeling of belonging, which is, I think, also the core of some current debates within Europe right now, at the broader level. But at the same time, so we have this opportunity through this link to highlight that belonging, which has to do with maybe a monument, or with a traditional farming practice, or with some local music, I don't know, practices. I mean, I think last year or 2 years ago, one of the Natura 2000 award winners, actually, was a project in Latvia, the so-called Nature Concert Hall, whereby you had a kind of combination of traditional practice about music within a protected area. So quite an extraordinary and special situation. But just to say, this kind of opportunities can offer a kind of recognition of what's happening on the local ground. At the same time, it can also show to people that you belong at the same time to a broader context, talking about a network of areas, talking about exchanging views with others. So it's not, you know, a recognition of identity, but at the same time, against any kind of, how to say, chauvinistic approach. So that's, I think, something interesting to explore further in our joint work.
Great.